Hello, this is Waldemar Januszczak, art critic, producer and presenter of documentaries. Thanks for watching Perspective, YouTube's home for classical art.
If you were going to make a kind of a Mount Rushmore of Hollywood directors, I think you'd put John Huston in there.
There are great directors out there, but most of them don't even match him as a personality and what he stood for.
He could make the ugliest woman in the room feel beautiful if he chose to.
Actors wanted to work with him. I'm convinced they said, well, John Huston wants me to work with him, so I'm going.
You have to be dedicated. He somehow gets it out of you. You've got to witness it to really understand it. He's just an extraordinary man.
John started his career a little late. He kind of wandered the world, having experiences before he settled down to first being a screenwriter and then being a film director.
He went off and he became an artist. He went to Paris. He published short stories. He wrote plays. He explored many different things. He famously went to Mexico and joined the cavalry in Mexico.
His father, of course, was Walter Huston, one of the great actors from the 30s and the 40s.
So he was brought into the world of theatre and the nascent movie industry. So he didn't come to it cold.
But when John came back, from the Mexican cavalry and going around the world and doing all these adventurous things, and then wanted to get serious, Walter helped him time and time again.
Being on the Warner Brothers, label, working with a bunch of great writers and directors even then, it shapes you.
He did Jezebel, Dr. Ehrlich's Magic Bullet, and then Sergeant York. And I think he said to them with Maltese Falcon, I want to direct this. First film, don't look back.
What do you want here?
Oh, I'm Sam Spade, Tom Polhart's phone.
Oh, I didn't know you at first. Back there.
But Maltese Falcon is a dark film. It's a film about treachery. It's a film with wonderfully kind of over-the-top villainy. He took the Hammett conception, the hard-boiled novel, and he brought to it, as a young man, that kind of gravity from his own experiences, that kind of sense of, embittered but worldly wise that Bogart kind of embodies within the film.
Let's see, shot up here, huh? Standing like you are with his back to the fence. The man who shot him stood here. Went over backwards, taking the top of the fence with him, and went on down the hill and got caught on that rock. That it?
That's it. The blast burning.
In Sam Spade, there was kind of an archetypal private eye, film noir, kind of existential hero. And it has this great Bogart performance that kind of defined Bogart, really, for the first time. And I think he and Huston had a kind of sparring but kind of pivotal creative relationship.
Oh, they were sick as thieves, John Bogey. They got on like a house on fire.
They were both smokers, drinkers, and obviously roustabouts in their earlier days.
I want to talk to Mr. Cairo, Joel Cairo.
At that time, there's this kind of prescribed logic to how you did films, and you planned ahead, and you went through the script, and you storyboarded, and you knew everything beforehand. And Huston's method was knowing nothing beforehand. I'm sure he did. I'm sure he knew exactly what film he wanted to make. But what he didn't want to do is have it all preordained. And he liked that kind of spirit within Hammett's kind of writing. Is there that kind of way it kind of bumps and jostles and gets to where it's going through a very kind of almost lifelike pattern.
Where is he?
What?
Where is he?
Oh.
Cairo.
What do you think you're doing, Jack? Kidding me?
I'll tell you when I am.
He used to like to shoot as much in continuity as possible.
I think it probably had to do with John's lack of focus. And he had trouble following it unless it was done that way. And he did all of his films that way.
He really liked the idea of you create the film as you make it, rather than pre-production or post-production. And it is said that he did very little editing because the film was almost completed.
We never came off the floor with a film of, say, 4 hours that could only run 2. You really only had to trim it out and, 10, 20 minutes. But you could get that with trims, not with cutting large chunks of the film. No, he shot to a length. He was, having been a screenwriter, he knew how to write to a length.
Of the original force to establish the beachhead at Salerno, the 143rd had since spent all but a fortnight in action, under extremely bitter weather conditions. At Salerno, at the Volturno crossing, it had taken mortal punishment. The task ahead promised no less bloodshed.
During the Second World War, he was a documentary maker, and he very much went the non-jingoistic route. He really analysed the effects of war.
Let's not call them documentaries. I think this is a misstatement. They're propaganda films, masquerading as documentaries.
Some 200 yards forward, they encountered mines and automatic fire from pillboxes.
I wasn't aware of any sharply dividing line between a documentary and a feature picture, except that the one that I talked about. In the feature picture, you wrote the script first and then shot the picture. And in the documentary, you shot the picture and then let the script come out of it.
The thing that also made it very powerful is the voice. John's narration. He's sort of unlike anybody else. It's this authoritative voice. It's a calm voice, it's a reassuring voice, and it's a melodramatic voice.
Volunteer patrols made desperate attempts to reach enemy positions and reduce strong points. Not a single member of any such patrol ever came back alive.
Quite famously, his films were banned because they weren't, very pro-American. He really started to analyse what the effects of war were on the veterans. And again, that's a theme that comes up a lot, the idea of courage and what war does to people.
And I'm told there was even a scene where he showed, the faces of dead soldiers lined up, and then he had, I think, people read their letters over their faces, these letters home. I mean, it was evidently just gut-wrenching.
Our initial assault on San Pietro had been repulsed with heavy casualties.
A number of these men were casualties, and I photographed them being put into their mattress covers. That required sitting them up and pulling the mattress cover around them so their faces would come into the camera. And I had the lines, the words that they said in their own voices, their own words and their own voices, over those close-ups of the men themselves.
When the War Department saw this, they went nuts. Forget this, and they completely re-edited it.
I suppose it was too effective, too emotional, and I agree, quite rightly, it was deleted from the material, from the final material.
What's interesting about Sierra Madre, obviously, in terms of the sequential in his career, it comes after his Second World War experiences, and I think that's very important.
And it's men disillusioned, men isolated, men turning on each other, revenge.
It's kind of a language of the wild and man's place in it. And sort of, again, from the Second World War, man's fragility within the wild.
What gets me is how he can go all day long in the sun without any water.
Maybe he's part camel, too.
Nobody ever went to location to shoot films. And plus the fact Mexico, he loved, he had a certain love affair with Mexico, because eventually he did move to Puerto Vallarta. I think he was there for a number of years.
I got it. The tiger. Yeah, that's it, the tiger. But they dragged him off to his lair, that's what. Yeah, pretty soon, not even the bones will be left to tell the story. Done as if by order.
He liked to take on nature. A lot of his films are about men taking on nature, or, you know, he was really drawn to being tested as a human being. Again, as his films are about people being tested by their environments.
Mind taking the tiller, miss?
But I can't steer.
Come on. A little to starboard, miss. No, the other way.
I got to meet John when I was assigned for the African Queen. They built huts for Huston and Bogie and Catherine. It was a camp hacked out of the forest. I mean, there was nothing there, and they'd made the camp out of it.
So for him, half of it was adventure. He was a storyteller, so for him to say, well, I'm going to tell a story with the African Queen, I want to go to Africa to shoot it, and not in a backlot in the studio at Warner's.
We simply can't remain here in this backwater until the war is over, Mr. Allnut.
Can't we, miss? You got the map. Show me a way out and I'll take it.
The British will certainly launch an attack. The only question is, which way will they come?
Well, maybe from the sea up the railway to Limbazi, but that would put the Germans between us and them.
Mightn't our soldiers come in from British East, Mr. Allnut?
Yeah, they might, but the war in Europe would be over before they ever hacked their way through that forest.
There's the film itself, and there's the story of its making, which is just as good as the film itself, almost. And it comes back to Huston's way of filmmaking and way of living. It's all about you experience it, and you can't fake life.
John didn't appear the first morning. We all got down there, Bogie and Catherine, and we all got on to the African Queen. And our director wasn't there, and he turned up at lunchtime, and there were the sort of production managers going mad, and John said, oh, I knew the weather wasn't good enough. You know, it wasn't raining, it was just a bit grey. I knew it wasn't good enough for shooting. Catherine was quite a disciplinarian, so she couldn't understand why he wasn't there.
I think he liked the idea that Hepburn felt detached and, you know, separated from what him and Bogart were getting on with it. Plus the fact that him and Bogart went back years and enjoyed each other's company and enjoyed each other's rivalry, you know, it was just there. For him, everything was experience and everything was doing and being there in the moment. So I think he let the film kind of bleed, the acting kind of bleed off the screen and into the kind of what was going on around it. So the kind of the hard drinking, the messing around, the being the tough guy with his actors was almost part of the process. So what they were doing in and around the shoot kind of then ended up on screen because he'd got this kind of atmosphere going, and the performances are sensational in that respect.
No, ain't no use, Rosie. I was forgetting the prop. The blade's gone.
Can't we go on the blades that are left?
No, the prop would be out of balance. Its shaft would be all twisted up like a corkscrew again.
We'll have to make a new blade then. There's lots of iron and stuff that you could use.
Yeah, tie it on.
I think in Bogart, he kind of got some richness out of him. He was getting on in life. I think he was wearying of acting. And it's exactly the right point to put him in the film because that weariness kind of comes out.
But as he always said, if you cast correctly, if you put the right actor in the right role, they will give it to you. And all it needs is a bit of fine tuning.
Oh, the little beggars.
This was an actor who liked to work 9 to 5 in Hollywood and walk off the set and, you know, get in his car and drive off. And, you know, and John Huston would make him go to the jungles of Africa and go in water full of leeches. He would do anything for John.
He gets the best out of the actors. He's got this sort of aura about him. You know, if he asks them to climb up the woodwork, they try and climb up the woodwork.
But the thing with John, it's like he doesn't have to necessarily animate himself as a director. I used to ask him, what's the magic of directing? He said, just tell him up a bit, down a bit. You don't have to really go, I mean, if you know your script so well and your story, you don't have to, you have actors who, if they're cast well, because it was all about casting for him, once you have a script, You leave them alone, literally, and make, let them tell the story.
If John had strong actors, he would give them their head, as it were, and they would do wonderful jobs because he didn't interfere. Unfortunately, if he had weak actors, insecure actors, or people who didn't quite get it, they could flounder and he really wouldn't help them. So it was a double-edged sword, but I think actors liked working with him.
You should not drink so fast, Monsieur Lautrec. It burns your stomach.
I'm thirsty. Please.
Wine is for thirst.
At least you did not say water.
Water is for Americans.
Some men can swing by their heels on the flying trapeze. Some men can become president of the Republic. I can drink cognac.
My agent had a message saying, would I go and see John Huston? I was asked to go to Claridge's Hotel because that's where he was staying. And I can remember he had a room on the first floor and he invited me in, sat down, and he said, tell me about yourself, kid. And I said, I was a cinematographer. Yes, he knew that. And what films had I done?
Henri, I thought I'd find you here. I've great news.
Ah, Maurice, have a drink.
He was writing notes all the time. And this conversation went on for about 15 or 20 minutes. And then he said, oh, thank you. And ushered me to the door. And I looked on the desk as I went out where he'd been writing. And he'd actually been drawing a picture of me, and it wasn't bad, I thought. So I thought, well, that's not very good. All he's been interested in doing a bit of painting of me.
That's not bad. Thank you. It might make a good poster for the Moulin. Well, it might at that. I tell you what I do, Monsieur Lautrec. You make that poster, and I give you 3 links for a month. Well, that's the best offer I've had. Think it over.
2 or 3 days later, I got a call from John Wolfe, the producer, and asked me to go and see him. So I went up, and John Wolfe asked me to photograph Moulin Rouge for John Huston. He expects you to do more than just strictly your job. I remember a classic example of him getting me to go and watch a rehearsal of the Can-Can. And he turned to me and said, what do you think of those costumes? And I said, well, I don't think they're the right ones, really. We should have more of a black and white costume with the frills. And he called the costume lady over and said, Oz doesn't like the costumes. Not him. I didn't like the costumes. Have you got any other costumes? And of course she had. Put the other costumes on, and of course it was fine. The thing was, I was being blamed. And that, I learnt, was a sign that he's very fond of you. And from then on, he trusted me. Anything I did.
From my point of view, working with John, was that he used to let me stay on sometimes, and I'd see the rough cut and I'd make comments. He respected people's jobs, and if he thought that you were doing it well, he was always encouraging.
Looming straight up and over us, like a solid iron figurehead suddenly thrust into our vision, stood Captain Ahab. His whole high, broad form weighed down upon a barbaric white leg carved from the jawbone of a whale. He did not feel the wind or smell the salt air. He only stood staring at the horizon.
It's not a surprise that he was the guy to tackle Moby Dick. What is the ultimate story of man versus nature? Well, it is probably Moby Dick.
You ought to look for a white whale. A whale as white and as big as a mountain of snow.
And there's a little bit of Ahab in him as well, you know, that driven nature, that obsession with, finding the white whale, and for Huston it must have been finding the white whale of movies, whatever it may be.
Long days and nights we strained at the oars, while the white whale swam freely on.
Well, I think he considered being on the camera boat as a holiday. He just sits there and enjoys himself while we struggle to get it right. And, you get the answer, "Let me know when you're ready, kid." That used to be his famous line. Because basically, when you see him direct, he's a lazy director. I mean, he never gets out of his chair, and you think he's not concentrating. But that's the thing. You've got to be very careful. He is concentrating. He's subletting all his ideas out to his unit, and that's how he gets a good crew together.
Mr. Miller, why did you file application for passport?
I wanted to go to England.
For what reason?
You guess.
We'd like you to
I wanted to be with the woman who is going to be my wife.
You mean Marilyn Monroe?
That's correct.
Do you have her in mind for any particular part? Are you going to write a play for her?
I wish I could, but I've never been able to write a play for any actress. If she fits one of the characters, she's got the job.
Arthur Miller asked my father, and indeed our whole family, up to Roxbury, Connecticut, where he lived with Marilyn, to read something he had written. My father and Arthur went back a very long way. Dad published his first 2 books. And Arthur had asked him up, I think, maybe more in a literary way than in a film way, but he knew Dad had experience with both. And immediately, I think the first thing Dad said to him, "This is a Huston movie."
Hello. How'd you make out?
Okay.
I'd like you to meet a friend of mine. Gay? Yeah. Gay Langland? This is Tabor.
How'd he do?
It was a good script, Misfits, and maybe he read it and liked it, and maybe didn't feel he needed to adapt it. It's unusual for him because I think he just feels anything that's around he's better than.
He respected writers immensely. And in my view, one of the troubles with the Misfits is he had so much respect for Miller and for Miller's words. He didn't step in at some point and say, "Look, this is getting way too wordy. This is too play-like."
But maybe Miller was the one guy who we thought, yeah, he's on a par with me. It's hard to say. The film was fraught with different problems, and maybe those problems overtook his time, and just getting that damn film made might have kind of been more than spending his kind of evenings fiddling with the words.
I'll bet you $2 you can't hit it 10 times in a row. Wait, I'll take that bet. Go ahead. Go on. Right, sure, here's the puppy. Oh, wait, gangway. We got a better. Back.
I mean, Marilyn Monroe, as much as she was a big star, but I mean, she was looking up to someone like Huston.
She had the production company, and John was brought into that production company, I believe, for the Misfits. And so it was a perfect match, I mean, from her point of view.
He'd been warned by Billy Wilder before he started. Billy had just done The Wonderful Some Like It Hot and said, "John, it shouldn't happen to you. She's nearly killed me, with the being late, not knowing the lines."
With John's short attention span and all that, what is remarkable is he did know how to treat Marilyn. I've told you how awful he could be with actors that were messing up. Well, Marilyn messed up more than any of them. Take after take after take after take. Always calm. Let's try it again, dear. And she would be saying, "I can't do this." We'll work through that. Never raised his voice, never took her to task.
Why are you killing him?
Just stand aside, honey.
Okay, you won. All right, you won. You won.
Let's go then, rope. Get out of here.
Guido.
Follow him. Choke him down, Guido. Get off me, Rosa.
Stop.
Get him. President, shut up and pull that horse down.
The thing that changed is the Strasbergs had entered her life. And she had come to New York to study at the Actors Studio.
She was a guest to go in and watch the Actors Studio in action. And Lee Strasberg was, at that time, the head of it. And then she found out about Paula.
And so she became her acting coach. And I remember very distinctly as a kid, during a take, he'd say, cut, and Marilyn wouldn't look at the director, she'd look at Paula. Was that okay? She wasn't asking John if it was okay, she was asking Paula if it was okay. And then John would have, if Paula said no, he'd have to do the scene over again.
John looked and said, in his mind said, I know what's going on. Nothing is being put beyond me.
Frankly, there was nothing he could do. She, I think, had kind of lost sight of everybody. You just had to let her do whatever she wanted.
You liars! All of you liars! You're only happy when you can see something die! Why don't you kill yourself and be happy? You and your God's country! Freedom!
Later on in the production, months later, John Huston called the cast together and said, I want to warn you about something. I will not interfere with Paula Strasberg being behind the scene, because I know what's going on. And I don't want any of you to interfere with her going ahead and helping Marilyn Monroe.
Maybe there was subtlety at work. He thought the way you can play Monroe is not to holler, is not to nag at her, because directors, Billy Wilder and people in the past have tried the screaming and it's done nothing. Maybe he was thought, if I leave her be, I can get something out of her.
He knew how delicate she was, and he treated her accordingly. It's probably the only reason the Misfits got finished.
John was a great diplomat. John could get on with anybody. I mean, John could charm a room. He could make the ugliest woman in the room feel beautiful if he chose to. I've seen him do it many, many times.
I think Marilyn's one of the only women he didn't sleep with. Quite amazing. He had this thing with women. Valeria, for instance, she didn't speak any English and he didn't speak any Italian. They were lovers.
And in fact, he found it, I think, very hard to have a really good relationship with a woman.
And it is not sort of, to forgive him those things, but often you'll find it's about, if you are, settled, you're not creating great art. You're not discovering that side of yourself. So he was moving on through women and marriages and great passions with alarming swiftness, because he fed off that as much as, as part of his creative journey.
Rosalind, this is Perce Howland.
Well, old gay's sure coming up in the world. How do, man?
This is Isabel.
Hi. Oh, excuse me. I got a call in for home, but they keep putting me in Wyoming. Hello?
John's relationship with Monty Clift changed because on the Misfits, Monty, I remember he had his telephone scene and he did it in one take and he didn't have to cover it and he was word perfect.
Oh, no. My face is fine. It's all healed up. It's just as good as new. You would, too, recognize me.
Everybody was, so you say, pleasantly surprised at how well-behaved Montgomery Clift was throughout the Misfits. I remember he'd had that terrible accident. His face had been disfigured. This was really his first major film that he was going to be coming back. And he was letter perfect.
And, because he acted well and gave no trouble on the Misfits, he was cast in Freud. And John did not know that Monty was gay.
And evidently it was on the lead up to Freud that I think when Monty came to visit him at St. Clarence, he brought a boyfriend. And John naively said, "Who is this man?" And somebody said, "What's his boyfriend?" And John he's a homosexual.
When I did join the film, John said to me, "But you never told me." And I said, "Well, I don't know why. I was supposed to. Everybody else knows."
He was the only person in Hollywood that didn't know that Monty Clift was gay. And I'm afraid that had a lot to do with how he treated him thereafter.
It wasn't one of the better sides of John, I saw in his relation to Monty, he was really actually quite cruel to him on certain scenes.
He did have a kind of sadistic streak in him. He liked doing practical jokes. Some of them were quite mean.
But I certainly think he used bullying as a tactic as a director. I think he kind of created atmospheres that created tensions that he wanted, much like Kubrick did, much like Hitchcock did, much like Polanski still does. He was drawn to subjects that were very production-driven, very much about location. For a man who travelled the world, you know, you can't let that go, and films allowed him to carry on travelling the world and be in places and experience them. And The Man Who Would Be King, you know, is the kind of perfect example of what Huston was all about.
Morning to you, brother. I'm glad you stopped by and caught the matinee performance. What do you think of it?
Well, it's convincing enough, but what the devil are you two rascals up to now? Last week it was kings you were to be, of Kafiristan, as I remember.
Right, but we got to get there first.
He gets two terrific performances out of Caine and Connery.
Michael and Sean got on like mad, and they all got on with John.
We're going to teach you soldiering, the world's noblest profession. When we've done with you, you'll be able to stand up and slaughter your enemies like civilized men.
It was all about imperialism, it was about nature, it was about the idea of power and the lust for power. Again, it goes back to Sierra Madre. You know, it's also kind of a good sister film to that. Men out in the wild, in the mountains, slowly going mad.
Ready, steady, go.
1, 2, 3.
1, 2, 3. You say at the same time as all the others, right?
I love The Man Who Would Be King. It's also very close to where I come from, Iran, where I know that how you could be nobody, a soldier, and you declare yourself a king. So I think he did go out there and try to tell a story that is even today is so, you know, poignant.
But it captures also that something of the magic of Kipling, that kind of otherworldliness, the sense of adventure, all these things that I think Kipling imbued into the story, Huston does very well, that there are little corners of the planet unchecked and that, you know, are there for people to discover.
All right. You got us here. Now what? Where's your high pangendrum?
I went out there to Morocco to sort the locations out. While we were there, an old boy came out from round the back who looked totally unwashed, and I said to the production man who was with me, I said, look, when we come looking at locations with John Huston, don't let him come and be seen or he'll want him in the picture. He comes out, he says, right, he'd like to go around the locations with me. We go around the locations and we get to this one, and to my total horror, this old boy came out and came running up to Huston, jabbering, and in fact he did cast him, and the old boy was a revelation, and he'd never acted in his life before.
No, what did he say, Billy? He say, now we shall see.
And he does it all by sign language and jabbering in some language, which God knows what it was. And Huston would show him what to do.
Only highest of high priest knows about this sign. Put in stone long ago by Sikandar. Now, Kafu Salim rejoicing at the coming of his son.
But John, you see, was so good with those people. He could charm them, even though they didn't speak the same languages. They had a respect for him, you see, and would do more or less anything.
No director except John Huston would ever take that chance. He knew exactly what he was going to do. I personally thought he'd made a terrible mistake. I was wrong. We were all wrong. And the old boy did a great job.
And he came out with this wonderful line, now I'm immortal, because he'd never seen a film and everything, and they brought him to the rushes and he saw his face on, you know, and so it was a lovely line, now I'm immortal.
Sit down.
What for?
You may think you know what you're dealing with, but believe me, you don't.
Well, he was certainly an actor's director. He was also an actor's actor. He appeared, I believe, in 55 films as an actor.
Sheriff's gold posse. Bunch of damn fools to pay $5,000 apiece towards the sheriff's re-election.
He appeared in various films, solely in an acting capacity. And although he always made his actors learn the words perfectly, I think he had a great deal of difficulty learning the lines.
I happen to know Hollis was fond of her. I'd like to help her if I can.
I mean, he's amazing because he fit the part. Brilliant. In fact, probably half of his character was John. The other half, he was playing the character. And he had the most amazing voice anyway, that, you know, you could narrate, you want to hear it so beautiful. You could read Yellow Pages, and it would be interesting.
Oh, there you are. Well, you don't look too much the worse for wear, Mr. Gibbs, I must say. Where's the girl?
I've got her.
Is she all right?
She's fine.
Well, where is she?
With her mother.
And I think he may have just sort of enjoyed not having to be the director. It must have been marvellous to go onto sets and do your little bit and go off and sort of hang out with the other actors. Directing is hard, you know, and certainly the way John Huston did it is very hard. You know, if you're an older man, that's daunting, you know, and tiring. And I think he lost his enthusiasm for it a bit. And I think it's something that needs a great deal of enthusiasm, a great deal of energy. There was an easing off, none of which explains Escape to Victory.
The team will be ready to travel at midday on Thursday. Further arrangements will be announced later.
One of my men is in the punishment block, in solitary.
I can give you a trainer. You don't need him.
Hatch is my goalkeeper.
The American? No. Tony Lewis is your goalkeeper.
He's broken his arm.
It's a football-themed POW film starring team members of Ipswich Town. You know, how much he was aware of that, I don't know, but you know, it's a film about men. 20% of it was about football as a backdrop, but the story was about a bunch of guys trying to escape. So I mean, that held well.
Coming, John!
Penalty area. The referee will probably call a penalty kick, and he does.
I remember when I went to I think it was Budapest. I went there on the set for a couple of weeks. He had no idea how to shoot football. John was just in his trailer. And I think his AD was Tommy Shaw, where Tommy was directing a lot of the time. And you know, Michael Caine was there, all these footballers, Ozzy Ardiles and Pele and everybody were there. Stallone, of course, was playing the goalkeeper. But I never forget the fact that John was saying, why don't you go and there's 16 cameras and do you direct the football sequence with Tom Shaw? You know, it kind of marks the point where I think some of his love of filmmaking started to wane and his sort of commitment to himself as some kind of auteur or artist, you know, was drifting away and he was moving into that rather kind of peculiar second phase of his career.
He smoked like a chimney. He had cigarettes that came specially from New York, and they were like cigars, that colour. And he was smoking these day in, day out, and the emphysema got very bad. I think what happens at a certain time of your life, you know, you kind of get burned out. Any directors, I think they lose it at some point. Whether it's a Scorsese, or a Coppola, or Huston, or anybody.
It's the hard knock life for us. It's the hard knock life for us. Static treated, we get tricked. Static says we get picked. It's the hard knock life.
I do believe one of the reasons that he made some dubious films along the way, and there were a number of them, was he just needed money.
John had a big overhead, And it was, I think I paid about $1 million then, which is a lot of money, in 1982. I think that's when he directed that. There's a lot of money. And of course, Ray Stark was his friend. And so when he asked him to do Annie, I mean, he said, absolutely.
Don't it feel like the wind is always howling? Don't it seem like there's never any light? Once a day, don't you want to throw the towel in? It's easier than putting up a fight.
You shouldn't underestimate the challenges that certainly a musical offer as a director. They aren't easy. They're a very different beast from, you know, the African Queen or Sierra Madre. And I think he may have liked to test himself in that way. And you mellow as you get older.
It's the hard knock life. It's the hard knock life.
I think certainly there was a generational thing going on. I think as you get to a certain age, when you become a grandfather figure, I think that makes people think about themselves as fathers, because you see your sons become fathers and you see your daughter become mothers. And I think that makes you think about family a lot more. And I think he did maybe turn to subject matters. You know, Annie is about an orphan, you know. It's about fatherhood in some ways. It's about adapting to that.
I don't mean to hurt your feelings. You've been nicer to me than anybody in the whole wide world. But I've been dreaming of my folks for as long as I can remember, and I just gotta find them.
And I'll help you.
Daddy Warbucks is an interesting Huston-like figure in his own peculiar way. And I think he may have been, you know, wanting to make up for the absent years, make up maybe for not being a great father. And, you know, to also cut himself some slack, maybe, you know, to explore sensitive things within himself and the idea of himself as a grandfather and a father figure.
I think he was clueless as to how to deal with his own children. It seems to me that's just the way he was.
When I'd hear people ask him about his children, Tony and Angelica, he'd always talk about Tony, the son, and if I was around, I'd say, oh, you do have a daughter, you know?
It's not unique to John Huston that a very driven, hard-drinking, artistic figure would neglect his family. But it is interesting that as he got older, maybe he tried to make up for that to some extent. You know, he did try and re-embrace the idea of his own family.
Well, I graduated from the film school with Danny Huston, and both of us were kind of kids. We had no idea what we were doing next. So I was developing this project called Mr. Corbett's Ghost, based on the book by Leon Garfield.
Still open for business?
Never too late to be of service, sir.
So I said to Danny, why don't you direct and I'll produce it? So we kind of, both of us get on board together and then get your old man to play the soul collector. He said, well, that sounds like a good, you know, proposal. And that's how it all began.
Will you wait?
Tonight? New Year's Eve? No, deliberate. I'll be at supper at Jack Straw's castle.
Just being around him, you know, just like, oh, wow, you know, you keep pinching yourself.
Far, not too far. Eh?
Deep down, we knew he was not going to say no, because he wanted to help Danny.
Towards the end, it all became very sad, because he did a film with his daughter, and he had to have oxygen, and he had this oxygen machine fixed to a chair, you know, and with the thing by his nose.
We did the Mr. Corbett's. During the take, we had to take the oxygen out and put it back on again, and we used to generally do, I think, not more than 2 or 3 takes, because it was, you know, it was hard. He wouldn't remember his lines.
There's certainly a gravitation towards working with his offspring and kind of maybe re-embracing the idea of family.
Yes, I mean, he wasn't the greatest dad because he wasn't around. I mean, there's nothing new about that. But he did for all of them. I mean, for Danny, Mr. Corbett, for Angelica was Pretty's honor, and for Tony was the dead. So he really did kind of redeem himself, because they all have a career because of that.
The emphysema got very bad, and of course, in the end, I think that was his downfall. I think it's mentioned that at the end, Michael Caine and Sean Connery went to see him in his sickbed when he was very ill, and he smiled and mentioned their names from the parts they played in Man Who Will Be King. You know, that you've come to see me. And I think shortly after that he died.
If you put it simply, you say the Maltese Falcon, the African Queen, Treasure of the Sierra Madre, the Asphalt Jungle, you know, Man Who Will Be King, the legacy is there in the work. Extraordinary films that will live on.
The legacy he's probably left, it sort of has gone down the route from John's father, the great actor. Certainly that the Huston name has carried on.